The stars dimmed, like candles pinched between iron fingers, and the galaxy held its breath. On the pilgrim routes, seers forgot the second half of Proverbs, as though memory had grown frost. In a garden of wraithbone spires, 1,000 soul stones blinked twice, then steadied lower, like a choir dropping a key. On that lull, a shadow stretched. Hunger made curious, curiosity honed to a blade. Lyrael felt it in her long bones, iron and lilac on the skein, the scent of something learning to dream. Before we begin, know that I love you truly, and I am glad you are here. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. She stood at the cliff of the craft world's memory, a balcony open to an atrium of song. The infinity choir breathed through a lattice of light. Each pulse kept the dead near and the living honest. Tonight the chords wavered. She steadied a soul stone as one might a child. The stone answered with a tremor of forgetfulness. Immortality had taught her to wait. Yet what if the word she needed had been stolen mid-vowel by an alien mouth? She listened deeper and found where joy ought to have lived. It was not gone. It had been tasted. The seer council gathered like a crescent of teeth. Autarch Calith's armor creaked with victories. Bonesinger Thiesel carried a tuning fork whose note was the color of evening. Warlock Sereth stood apart, as if his shadow had learned bad manners elsewhere. There is a splinter fleet on the rim, Lyrael said, voice soft enough to keep the choir from imitating her fear. Not merely hungry, listening. We strike the throat before the teeth set, Calith said. Names are already breaking, Thiesel murmured, dusting dim motes from his fingers. When names dim, walls thin. Sereth smiled without comfort. Or we light another path, terror brighter than anything here. They'll follow the lightning. That path is paved with strangers, Lyrael said. Better strangers than our children, Sereth answered, and quiet fell. They walked the memory gardens for augury. Wraithbone branches arced overhead like cathedral ribs. Bells of liquid glass hung between boughs, tuned to ring when the skein twisted. Tonight the bells made a weather out of pain. Something has tasted prophecy, Lyrael said. Not to finish it, but to savor, and it will follow the strongest flavors. Calith gestured toward the ship lanes. Seed false flavors, dead worlds salted with theatre, and harry them while they chase the storm. Thiesel shook his head. If we write despair, the skein will remember its shape. Art shapes appetite. Sereth's voice went silk soft. What shapes appetite better than starving? Divert the moon. And drown a coastline to do it, Lyrael said, touching stones she would not pawn. The craft world slid along its tired star. Rangers reported a silhouette at the rim. Void-slick hulls like beetle shells, spines, flashing like tongues. At an abandoned moonhouse, Calith cut a synapse chain. For 1 hour, the swarm faltered. Then it learned. A bell-skulled beast drank shrine wrath and rang it back as command. Calith returned with an exarch dying in his arms. A small future bled into Lyrael's palm, a hallway, a door, cold water to the ankles. In vision she opened the door and found the choir silent, not because they had died, but because their names had melted. Behind her, someone she loved turned a key. The key was a note. Sereth stood too near. What did you see? Enough to know which doors not to open, she said, watching guilt flicker like moth wings behind his composure. Night is a choice. Tonight, they chose it. Corridors darkened to the color of sleep. Lyrael watched the stars reduce themselves to salt. Immortality felt like a room with too much furniture. Faces from 10,000 years crowded her memory like cards on a table too small to hold them. What is the price of living long enough to learn mercy? A tremor touched the skein, delicate as a spider testing a strand. An image came. Ripples, a reflection of stars disturbed by a black shape bending to drink. She felt impossible, observed by hunger, curious enough to pause. She spoke into the choir, not words, but care. A laugh remembered, a friend's palm, a patient teacher over a stubborn student. Small lights hoarded against the night. The skein glowed, the hunger considered. Then it moved on, marked. Evacuate the young, the songsmiths, the tenders of gardens, she told the council at dawn. Prepare decoys, yes, but empty ones. We do not set fire to strangers to keep our hands warm. Calith nodded once. Thasil looked relieved and sick at the same time. Sereth measured a bridge only he intended to cross. And if the storm turns here, then we meet it with what we are, Lirael said, not with what we are willing to destroy. After the council, Lirael descended into underhalls, past gardens, where statues listened for news. At the Cradle Archive threshold she paused. The stone cooled her palm with a sorrow older than speech. She did not enter. She knelt, whispering the names of those who might ask her to. When she rose, something had settled. Not a strategy, not a map, but a refusal to survive by erasing what made survival worth naming. The bells rang again, insistent. On the rim, the shadow turned toward them like a pilgrim seeking a shrine never seen yet somehow remembered. The infinity choir breathed as one. The atrium filled with a low note like a sea remembering tides. Lirael looked upon her people and saw fear braided with resolve. The swarm was coming. This tale would not be about who could kill fastest, but about who could remain themselves while the dark demanded otherwise. She reached for the skein and began. Morning on Celestine broke like smoke through glass. Lirael walked the corridors, counting tremors in the skein as others count heartbeats. Joy had thinned. The choir sang with a bruise in its throat. The fleet was far enough to tempt bravado, near enough to give fear a face. Calith found her in a garden of mirrors that turned one figure into a legion. Rangers report spoor, he said. They read our debris trails. If we do not strike first, we become the lesson. We cannot teach what we fear to become, Lirael said. Strike to delay, not to define. I am the blade that buys hours, he answered. Hours contain names. Will you open the cradle? The cradle is forgetting. I need every bruise. She adjusted the cords on his shoulder. Bring me hours, not bones carved into hours. Bone singer Thasil arrived with a small harp. The atrium hums with eddies, he said, plucking a note that softened the mirrors. Names drift toward drains. Air forgets how to hold shape unless we sing it back. Can you shore it? Calith asked. For a while, Thasil said, if we do not lie to the music. They crossed a bridge over sleeping industry. Below, citizens packed archives, sealed nurseries, lifted gardens. Sereth stood at the far end, bright as a blade set against the wall. Echoes from the rim, he said. Odd harmonics in the nets. I've heard them. In Comarar, Calith said. Corsairs scent blood like the swarm, Sereth answered. We will not be alone. There are ways to redirect predators. By feeding them something louder, Thasil said. By lighting storms, Sereth replied. No one has to die. Someone always does, Lirael said. Terror multiplies corpses while you count. You asked for hours, he said. I know where storms are sold. Council convened. Calith mapped intercepts and misdirection gardens. Thasil tuned the choir against lures he could only imagine. Lirael wrote evacuations that read like blessings. Sereth watched doors and said little. Later, she found him in a chapel. He leaned on Wraithbone, palms flat. "Say it," he said. "I love you," she told him, "and I do not trust the road you are tracing." "The cradle can amputate goodness," he said. "Komarag is surgery without anesthesia. I would be the knife between." "You are softer than your posture," she said. She touched the small crescent behind his ear. "If you go, you will trade something you do not know you carry. The debt will be taken from our future. If I do not go, our future will be eaten. I would rather we owe than vanish." She wanted to forbid him. The word perched like a hawk that loves the glove. "I will not sanction it," she said. "I cannot lock every door." He nodded, as though granted leave. "Then bless me," he said. She placed her hand on his brow and spoke a blessing of bread and rain and home. When she lifted her hand, he was already further away. Calith met him at the hangar mouth. Engines warmed the air to a metallic dawn. "Bring vipers to our gold table," he said, "and I cut your hand at the wrist. If your spear had not broken on the ring world, you would call me coward," Sereth replied. "We are eating words, salted for others." "Do not mistake my ruin for your license," Calith said. Thasil pressed a thimble of tuned glass into Sereth's palm. "Wear this when you bargain," he murmured. "It will remind you how to pronounce your name. Return with any name at all." Sereth looked to Lirael. His smile was a child's before a jump measured badly. "Ours," he promised. They descended to a webway gate, long sealed. Its petals were scabbed with sigils. The choir's breath reached this depth only as memory of warmth. Guardians stood with helms lowered. Lirael felt the skein draw tight, a silent twang. "If you go through," she said, "you do not go alone. The part of us that loves you will follow and be hunted." "Then let it teach me not to be prey," he answered. He set the glass behind his teeth. "If I return with storms, do not bless the lightning. Save it for the ground." She pressed the rune that unlatched the iris. "Remember the joke you told me at 14, she whispered. "Remember that you laughed." The gate opened like an eye. Air rushed in, tasting of knives. Beyond lay angular night, towers like vertebrae, bridges lacquered from screams hammered flat. Faint laughter drifted. Sereth stood on the threshold and looked back. Calith's hand tightened on an absent hilt. Thasil lifted his chin, as if singing, though no sound left his mouth. Lirael kept her face calm, the way a shoreline behaves for the sake of boats. He bowed to none. It was not pride, but economy. He needed every fragment to buy the first word. "Ours," he said again, and stepped through. The iris sealed with a click like a tooth. Guardians rotated outward. The air grew colder by a name. She turned to Calith. "Bring me the maps," she said. "We will sow false corridors and plant emptiness where terror expects fruit. We will not purchase survival with strangers." "I will buy you ours," he said, and left. Thasil remained. "He wore the glass," he whispered, thumb on a string. "It may help him keep a syllable." "One will do," Lirael said. She rested her palms on the cold frame. Somewhere far away, a storm rehearsed its lines. The choir breathed above like a sea remembering tides. In that breath she hid a prayer without words. Let the child who laughed return as a man who refuses to forget why. Above them, the craft world drifted, vast and vulnerable, like a candle in wind at the rim. Far beyond Celestine's patient drift, where the galactic halo thins to frost and rumor, brood wombs pulsed like drowned cathedrals. The Norn queen drowsed in arithmetic made of flesh, tasting the spoor of a people whose memories rang like crystal in vacuum. New glands opened along her flanks, organs not of digestion, but of listening. She processed no speech, only the negative space around it, the hush that frames a song. In that abyssal quiet, something inside the hive grew curious. A lictor unfolded from a mucus cradle and steadied itself upon blade toes. Its skin read the chamber's dim aurora and wore it like script. Colours obeyed thought. Thought obeyed hunger. Where other lictors bathed in pheromones of fear and pursuit, this one washed in harvested whispers. A child's promise, a lover's breath at dawn, a war god's vow hissed through blood. The scents did not nourish. They arranged desire. When it moved, claws pricked sigils into the brood hall floor, and the floor remembered. Nearby, a zoanthrope drifted along a chain of living lanterns. Its bulwark skull throbbed with pale fire, tuned by residue leached from shattered soulstones. When it pressed its mind toward the void, not emptiness, but taste returned. Coppered grief, resinous caution, a sweetness like light through closed eyelids. Unseen organs fluttered, surprised. The zoanthrope hummed, not a command, but a lullaby stolen at a dying shrine, and the lanterns lengthened their glow as if flattered. Attendants poured offerings into the queen's maw, calcified hieroglyphs chipped from exodite monuments, magnetized ash sifted from aspect altars, thin ice carved from the breath of prophecy shed under stars now gone. Valves clicked like counting beads. The count was not of bodies, but of meanings. Across nerve bridges arched over amniotic seas, mycetic vats opened like chalices. From them crawled a new synapse brood, skulls ribbed with filigree canals to catch and root psychic perfume. The swarm would call them dream eaters, though no mouth upon them chewed sleep. A feeder tendril dipped into a vat and came away tasting of rain remembered from a world never visited. The tendril wanted more. A tyrant lowered a larval dream eater to study its frantic stillness. The larva froze, imitating a ranger it had never seen. The tyrant felt a tremor in its weapons node. The tremor resolved into attention. These broodlings were not tools merely. They were questions cast in meat. The tyrant set the larva down with an odd care, as one returns a relic that still burns. Outside the brood basilica, tide organisms rippled their fins in times kept by gravity wells. Spore chimneys counted distance with breaths of frost. Distant stars ticked like hooves on stone. Into that clockwork unhurriedness, the Mirror Queen began to bud, a chameleonic region grown from a neural coil lacquered with Eldar residue. She was not queen by right. She was capacity, to echo, to reflect, to learn the angle of another mind and return it with a tooth hidden inside. When she opened a new eye, it looked inward first. She saw, with a fairness that was hunger's cousin, that they had met walls made of song. Some walls yield to siege. Some teach the invader their names until the invader cannot speak without wincing. The Mirror Queen extended a filament into a vat where dream eaters slept and tasted a scar that had once been laughter. The flavor startled her. It did not weaken the lattice. It produced a shape inside the urge to break it. Against instinct, she learned to pause. On black decks, lictors practiced stillness inside storms of pheromone deceit. One stood in a rain of distilled panic and did not twitch, as if waiting for panic to forget itself. Genestealers sparred in choreography, learned from dying aspect warriors. Within their strikes, a hesitation lived, like the ghost of courtesy. Not mercy. There was no mercy here. But there was the first shadow of restraint, a tactical savoring the patience that makes a mouth more dangerous when it finally closes. The zoanthrope sang the lullaby again, and this time, when the sound touched the womb's walls, the walls answered with a harmonic outside calculation. The queen stirred, her belly flickered with unreadable constellations. In those lights, a course bent, not by gravity or the musk of biomass, but by a taste, thin, bright, and piercing, as the first chord of a song a people believes might save them. The fleet swam toward it as roots grow toward water they have never drunk but were promised in seed. Scout spores seeded ahead and returned with impressions that were not maps. Corridors that smelled of patience, orchards that tasted of handled tools, a city that resembled a vow kept across centuries of boredom. From the flood of sense, the Mirror Queen retrieved a single filament, a choir so vast the dead could breathe through it. She learned the tone of care and recorded it in the hive's grammar as a weapon class. A broodship shouldered through a minor nebula and shed frost-like veils. Within that haze, the queen contemplated an absence shaped like a gift. The dream eaters clustered toward it, as mesoflora do toward heat. For the first time, the hive suspected that flavor might be chosen rather than chased. Suspicion is the beginning of difference. Difference breeds danger. Yet evolution is a gambler, and hunger loves a rule it can rewrite. In a vault, a parasite engine extruded two tongues, one tipped with enzymes for dread, the other with traces of tenderness, one from a shattered soul stone. It weighed which brought organisms faster. Dread pulled bodies. Tenderness pulled songs that did not end when the bodies were ash. The engine clicked and chose to learn both. From the keel, living telescopes gazed, and the dark returned a hallucination, a craft world trailed by threads of music, like lanternfish with bridal veils. Beneath that mirage came a cadence impossible to miss once named, the recurring rhythm of a name said by many mouths at once, each loving it differently. The Mirror Queen marveled, then stored the marvel as a coordinate, Celestine. The first Dream Eater matured, small as a hand and terrible as a rumor. Setting it upon the neural throne, handlers fed it a ribbon of condensed prophecy, stripped from a farseer's last breath. The creature shivered, then spoke, without a mouth, by modulating nearby glands. Not words, but a corridor easiest to follow if one anticipated mercy. The fleet adjusted orientation. Organic gyros flexed, a million cilia aligned to a song no singer intended for them. A lone lictor, sent skating along webbed ice, found relics left by a ranger patrol, a threadbare scarf, a shard of mirror with frost-filmed fingerprints, a seed pod of wraithbone. It tasted each. The scarf told of a joke shared at 14 winters. The mirror carried the shape of a teacher's patience. The seed pod tasted like an argument ended before cruelty could begin. The lictor became terribly still. For several breaths, it did not want. Then wanting returned, complicated by memory it had not earned. The zoanthrope reached through the void once more and touched a seam where the choir exhaled. Contact ignited it like winter sunlight through glass onto old paper. In that combustion, it did not burn. It understood a contour, the space left when a people steps away from their own extinction and keeps walking. It sent the contour backward along nerves. The queen fed. The Norn queen dreamed for the first time in an epoch counted by predations. Her dream, a mirror of black water, stars trembling on its skin, and over the mirror a tide of flesh bending to drink. In the reflection, a face emerged, hers, but human thin, eyes bright with plans that were not consumption. The reflection raised a hand. She ached for one. Ache became vector. The fleet turned, not like a predator pouncing, but like a pilgrim adjusting to a remembered road. Lesser splinters whirled and broke off, obedient as iron filings round a lodestone. A corridor opened through dead light. Everything that had ever learned the hive's name trembled without knowing why. At the turning's heart, the Mirror Queen faced the skin of her birth vat and saw her image, a crown not worn, but grown by repetition. She flexed. The vat tore. In the viscous spill, she stood, dripping futures. To her handlers, she pulsed. Mimic news of mercy. Gift the enemy the orders they yearn to hear. Then close the hand inside the glove. Yet behind those directives, on a frequency only the Dream Eaters detected, she hummed the lullaby again. They listened, and in listening, the swarm learned to want what it had only tasted. In the final hour before translation, living citadels locked, bone navies pruned their antennae. Clouds of feeder organisms tasted vacuum for practice. The queen folded her dream and swallowed it to keep it warm. The course fixed, toward a lantern calling itself an infinity choir, toward a craft world whose memory tasted like vows. In the sheen of their own hulls, the hive saw its reflection, a black tide, slow as winter, studying the mirror of stars and learning, by desire to desire. They built the gardens from silence and light. Bone zingers poured wraithbone into thin lattices that remembered footsteps, then forgot them on command. Arches bloomed like frost and folded into corridors that argued with themselves, guiding a visitor with kindness until kindness looped and the visitor wept. The craft world's heart became a maze, not to imprison their own, Lirael told the crews, but to teach the swarm that patience here would taste like getting lost. Calith supervised the outer terraces, armored as if resolve weighed more than ceramite. He planted decoy shrines along void lanes and seeded them with echo bells tuned to heroic frequencies. Let them hear our courage from afar, he said. Let them mistake it for presence while we are elsewhere, unmaking their thinking chords. His captains marked strike gardens with inks that only showed in certain griefs. Under that sign, weapons slept that laughed once when they fired, as if remembering joy and choosing duty. Thazel tuned the air. He walked barefoot over singing floors, touching ribs and spoke struts until the atrium's breath came even. Where a note snagged, he hummed, and the snag became a veil, drifting in an imagined breeze. He climbed to balconies where the choir hung like a chandelier of slow suns, and whispered apologies for asking them to burn steady. I will not lie to you, he promised the dead, the living, and the in-between. I will only ask for rhythm. Lirael watched from the Garden of Three Refusals, a place of three gates that never opened in the same order twice. She held the skein with her mind as if it were a kite in unruly weather. The hunger's shadow brightened along their horizon like a bruise deciding to be real. She felt curiosity advancing, a palm pressed to glass from the other side, the warmth of breath fogging a mirror the size of a system. We will build gentleness into every corner, she said, so cruelty wastes time here, and time becomes our weapon. Night drills spun like reels through the corridors. Rangers practiced vanishing while standing still. Guardians learned to aim at echoes without anger. Children were taught how to walk their names around the atrium so their feet would remember when fear unthreaded thought. Calith inspected lines and scowled at Mercy. War is not a philosophy, he told Lirael as if she had forgotten. It is a hammer one uses before the house falls. It is also a house, she answered. If our hammer swings until nothing remains to shelter, we will be victorious and homeless. I want victory with rooms. At the far docks, petals opened to receive shipments from sympathetic corsairs who smiled with too many teeth. Sereth was not among them. He had not yet returned, and his absence nested in conversations like a blade wrapped in velvet. Lirael pretended not to listen for him. She failed, and the listening hurt less than the pretending. Deep beneath the glass gardens, Thasil led Lirael along a private stair. The stair bent like a promise to return. At its root lay a chamber carved before Celestine chose its current name. The air held a sweetness of sleep and dust. "I swore I would show you only if the choir asked," Thasil murmured, opening his hand to reveal a key made from a melody bent into metal. "The choir has asked in tears." The cradle archive sat like a low altar, plain, unadorned, save for hairline channels that patterned its lid like the grain of old wood. Lirael stood beside it as one stands beside a grave, already dug for the wrong person. "The unmaking songs," she said, voice so small that even the walls leaned closer. "Written after the fall, when sorrow measured itself against survival and chose to be smaller." "They are not all sorrow," Thasil said. He touched the lid without opening it. "Some are mercy. One erases a single hour from a single mind to forgive an enemy. One takes the taste of victory from a people, so they do not go mad with triumph. One," he paused, "one is badly named. It promises to unteach a predator the path of our breath. It costs much." "How much?" "Everything we were once in laughter. It burns the warmth that holds private rooms. We would still live. We would not know why we endure." Lirael closed her eyes, and behind her lids, she saw Calith's spear break and Sereth's shadow lengthen. She saw gardens dissolving, not from flood or flame, but from a careful hand undoing knots in the dark. "We will not open it," she said. Thasil exhaled a note that might have been relief and might have been grief. "Then we must guard it from ourselves, and from those who love us poorly." They sealed the chamber with the melody key. Lirael set a veil of notice over its stone. Not a trap, but a kindness that would make any who approached remember who had taught them their first song. As they turned back up the stair, the skein shivered. A far bell rang 3 times, though none had been hung there. At council, maps bloomed in the air like translucent petals. Calith drew vectors of thrust and retreat with 2 fingers that had learned to write in blood. "When they test us here," he said, "we cut here. When they break, we do not pursue. We cut again elsewhere and teach them that walking costs." "They will learn our cuts," Lirael said. "Then we teach cuts that taste like ash." Thasil inserted a cord into the map, and certain lanes dimmed. "These are gardens that lean," he explained. "Their echoes will pull the mind towards softer rooms. If the dream eaters depend on psychic perfume, we lace our perfume with disappointment." "Disappointment won't stop a mouth," Calith said. "No," Thasil agreed, "but it slows the swallow." They argued over the placement of sorrow. Lirael refused to turn refugee stations into bait. Calith refused to cede a certain moonhouse because its windows had seen too many dawns to surrender quietly. Thasil refused to fake laments he could not stand to hear. In each refusal, the plan found a spine. At dusk, if time could be said to dim aboard a wandering city, Lirael returned to the Garden of 3 Refusals and walked in circles until the gates agreed to open in the order of her childhood. She stood where she had promised a young Sereth that patience was a sword with a longer reach than rage. The floor remembered the weight of his boots. Memory is a generous liar. It softened the edges of arguments they had not yet had. She pressed her palm to the glass rail and tried to love him beyond the bargain she feared. Calith approached, less iron than dusk. He watched the maze hold and unhold itself. You treat war as if it can be persuaded. I treat hunger as if it can be delayed by taste, she said. Perhaps we are both arrogant. He surprised her by laughing once. If your gardens buy us a day, I will praise flowers for the first time. They deserve it, she said, even when no one watches. On the furthest terrace, rangers set mirrors angled to confuse not eyes, but intentions. The mirrors reflected the idea of turning around. A ranger demonstrated, took 3 steps, looked, and found his feet discouraged from finishing a foolish path. Works on me, he said, pleased. May it work on anything with desires. In the atrium, the choir sang, not loudly, but deeply, so that the hull remembered the word gentle and chose it when asked between options. Thiesel sat at the base of the chandelier, with his harp across his knees, eyes closed as if listening to rain under stone. He plucked a measure and sent it into the skeleton of Celestion, where it would drift along ducts and wake sleeps. Night bled into another rehearsal of alarms. Children traced routes with solemn fingers. Lovers practiced meeting at a different stairwell. Should fire write its short alphabet along the old one? Lirael made rounds, exchanging touch and presence more than orders. She found herself at the sealed stair again without deciding to go. The stone was cool. Behind it, the unmaking songs waited like knives wrapped in cloth, dreaming of usefulness. She laid her forehead to the door and whispered, "Not yet, maybe never." Somewhere beyond the rim, the hunger turned its face fully toward them. She felt it like winter deciding to stay. She imagined its hand on the glass, and the breath it would fog, and the patient tongue that would taste what they had prepared. "Come gently if you can," she said to the absence. "But if you cannot, know we will make you wait." When she lifted her head, a footprint marred the dust on the stair's first step that had not been there before. Not fresh, but recent. Not ranger, not guardian. A boot, she knew. She touched its edge and felt slivery warmth, like glass held between teeth. Love can be proof or wound. She stood very still, as if stillness could stretch the hour wider. Then she rose, set her shoulders, and went to finish the gardens that would ask a monster to lose itself long enough for a sun to come home. Sereth returned at false dawn, when the hull lights cooled to the colour of breath on glass. He did not arrive by gate. He stepped from a courier hull that shed shadow like old paint, and the air around him carried the faint ring of laughter that was not his. Thaisel felt it first, a grit in the music. Calith felt it second, a nick on his knuckles as if a blade had thought of him. Lirael knew before the call came. Love has the long antennae of fear. He walked with hands visible, palms pale as moons swallowed whole. "I have hours," he said, and the words scratched the corridor. A second, quieter echo followed a heartbeat late. A chain of dark beads hung at his throat, each droplet a scream, hammered flat and lacquered to shine like oil. "I have a map of storms. We can light them, and the swarm will turn." Calith studied the beads, the way one watches a leashed predator. "What did they cost?" "Nothing you would let me pay," Sereth said softly. "Something I could afford." Thiesel stepped closer, inhaling through his teeth. "You smell like knives telling jokes," he murmured, "and like a boy who swallowed a mirror." "The thimble helped," Sereth said, touching his jaw where the tuned glass had rested. "I did not forget my name. I loaned it." Lirael dismissed the watchers and walked him into the Garden of Three Refusals. The gates opened in a new order, wary as cats. She took his wrists, reading the tremor there. "What debt follows you?" The kind that collects even when the door is barred, he said, but it promised to wait until after the harvest. Show me. He unrolled a scroll of star leather that drank light like thirst. Etched into it were terror vectors drawn from trafficked agonies, corridors of dread bright enough to magnetize predators. Each line carried a taste he could still remember, the crushed hush of thousands held breathless for sport, the educated fear of a noble watching their mind disassembled with compliments, the strobing panic of a child taught to beg sweetly. He spread the map on a singing floor. The floor refused to hum. We place these beacons, he said, tapping way stations no one had lived in for centuries, dead rings with only signage and dried prayers. We paint despair on them with actors and machines. The swarm follows the brightest cruelty. We lead it wide. No captives, Lirael said. No living ones, he answered too fast, then softened. No one who can be named. Calith's jaw set. You brought us theatre and razor wire, no certainty. Certainty is for those who die before the bill arrives, Sereth said. We live too long for that luxury. Thistle pressed his palm to the map. It slid from his pulse. This is a wedding veil cut from cries, he whispered. If we wear it, some part of us will marry the knife. We will not wear it, Lirael said. We will hold it away, and only long enough to breathe. But she already feared how quickly breath becomes habit. The council assembled beneath the lantern of the choir. The map drank their light and gave back theatre. Captains argued in circles that felt rehearsed by unseen hands. Calith traced a hunter's arc with 2 fingers that had learned to write in blood. If we stage disasters, our children will learn to arrange ruins with skill, he said. We may win and become architects of ash. Better ash than silence, a warlock muttered. Better difficulty than ease bought with cruelty, Thessel returned, and the lantern above them pulsed like a throat clearing. During the clamour, a masked intermediary waited in the doorway, posture casual as a thought postponed. No insignia, no scent except clean metal, no weight in the skein at all, as if a page had torn itself from a book. Sereth's gaze hooked and held. Lirael saw the look and learned the shape of a pit. Who are you? Courier, the mask said, voice filtered not to hide identity, but to make identity itself seem provincial. I carry keys for doors you do not want to open yourselves. I can plant your storms. We plant nothing we will not harvest, Lirael said. Then consider me a distant branch of your hand, the mask replied. Sereth vouches coin, I vouch proof. Sereth's mouth tightened. They have access, we do not. Their ships trade in shadows. We can act now, before the swarm adjusts again. Calith's patience tore. You would hand our sky to a stranger? Build paths through our bones and call it salvation? We already supped in their city, Sereth said. We ate storms with spoons and named it strategy. Lirael lifted her hand, the debate folded. You will show me, she told the mask. Plant one storm at a place of our choosing, empty of names. We watch the turn. The mask inclined slightly, amused. Choose. Lirael pointed to a ghost tab on the rim of a dead ring, where only brittle banners and dried prayers remained. There, she said. And if you step near any place true, our walls will remember your face and trip your feet forever. Understood, said the mask, smiling without teeth. It passed for kindness if one had never seen better. They moved quickly. Calith prepped a company to sever anything that sniffed too close. Thaisel wove counter-harmonies to keep the choir from tasting the forgery and believing it theirs. Lirael walked with Sereth to the dock. You will not go, she said. I must oversee, he answered. They know tricks. I know which hurt too much to let them play. You returned with storms, she said quietly. Do not become one. He opened his hands. I am holding ours. That is all. The courier's craft detached and slid without lights, a knife travelling through a dream where knives were illegal. Sereth lingered in the hatch, as if he could delay the first cut by savouring anticipation. The skeins showed Lirael a brief future in which he was already gone. She did not waste the breath to call him back. They watched from the Garden of Mirrors as the ghost hab bloomed with false catastrophe. Holograms set walls burning cold. Machines cried in registers crafted to mimic fear. Timed detonations taught the air to stutter. The choir flinched. Thasil fed the atrium rain. At the rim, the swarm pivoted like a school discovering new current. Vastness turned its head. It works, Calith said, distrustful of relief. It works, Sereth whispered through the link that carried his breath warm. The mask's ship ghosted behind the mirage, adjusting brightness like a thief dimming lanterns. For an hour, Celestine breathed. Strike Gardens reset teeth. Mirrors cooled. Lirael allowed her hands to unclench. Then, as if a seam tore where none had been, the swarm did not merely follow anguish. It ate the pattern. Dream Eaters arced like swallows, metabolizing the hoax into a new synaptic shortcut. They are feeding on the act of luring, Thasil said. Douse it, Lirael ordered. Make the storm forget itself. On the dock, Sereth stood with the masked courier, both turning toward the sudden dark. The skein plucked warning. The mask leaned in, accepting a data skein passed palm to palm. Too quick, too practiced. Calith saw it late. By the time he reached them, the transfer was done. What price for our hour? Lirael asked the air, and it did not answer. The swarm veered, yes, and the hour was theirs. But hunger did not stumble. It smiled behind closed teeth. Celestine had taught it to taste lightning as honey, and now a stranger carried a map of where the sweetest storms could be lit. The choir held its note. Somewhere below, a sealed stair cooled, remembering a footprint that should not have been. Lirael looked at Sereth and saw a man who had borrowed time and pledged love as collateral. She turned away before mercy could become cruelty, and the gardens exhaled, ready for what must follow. The first unmaking came without trumpet or omen, only the faint shiver of silence before alarms remember their purpose. On Celestine's outermost ring, beneath a moon cracked into crescents of ice, Calith's spear company struck. The plan was simple. Carve through a synapse conduit before it could anchor its brood. In the shadow of that dying satellite, simplicity bled away. They descended through a sky of frozen dust that glowed like powdered pearl. The ground beneath was alive, the dust moving in patterns that mimicked thought. When Calith's boots hit soil, it hummed, and he realized too late that he was walking on a choir made of flesh. Bolters barked. Wraithbone cracked under recoil. The horizon boiled with Tyranid wings, thin, translucent things beating in rhythms stolen from heartbeats. Calith's visor painted the swarm as a storm of equations, each creature a fragment of hunger, assembling itself toward intention. His spear's edge blazed white, a star constrained to obedience. "Cut the chain," he shouted. No trophies, no prayers, just sever and fall back. The Guardians obeyed, moving in precision arcs, songs of targeting data whispered between them. The synapse beast loomed ahead, its skull a cathedral of exposed neurons pulsing blue-black light. Calith lunged, impaling its brainstem. For 1 second, the swarm convulsed like a world remembering pain. For 1 second, he thought victory still had meaning. Then the thing opened its many eyes, and within each, Calith saw reflections of himself dying in different futures. The synapse screamed without sound, feeding on possibility. The choir aboard Celestine flinched miles away. Lyrael felt the echo and clutched her chest as if stabbed by her own foresight. The beast changed. It exhaled through Calith's armor, inhaling the shape of his faith. Flesh rearranged itself into the outline of a warrior. It wore his stance like a child mimicking a parent. Calith tore free, plasma searing the imitation, but every cut birthed smaller, sharper versions. The Wraith Guard waded in, singing the dirges of old empires. Their cannons flared, incinerating swathes of chitin and bone, yet the swarm's rhythm adapted. The Dream Eaters at the edges began to hum, voices stolen from the last Eldar who had screamed. The sound twisted through Vox and mind alike. "Fall back," Calith ordered, dragging a wounded Exarch toward the evac line. The Exarch's mask was cracked. His voice came out in fragments of other lives. "They learn the future," he rasped. "They taste it, sweet, like honey." The words dissolved into static. Above, the void split like glass under pressure. A new Tyranid shape descended, vast and fluid, a synapse relay alive with mirrored light. It moved as though it anticipated thought before thought existed. Calith realized it was learning the pattern of command itself. Every order he spoke became a lesson. He switched to silent signals, but even that seemed futile. The air read gestures as if translating them for the enemy. "Thasil," he called over the comms. "We are teaching them war. End the lesson." In the atrium, Thasil heard and obeyed. His hands fluttered across harp strings, rewriting resonance. The choir's voice shifted to discord, a lattice of wrong notes and false comfort. The sound reached the battlefield like a prayer that forgot its god. The Tyranids stumbled, faltered, then screamed again, adapting even to dissonance. On the moon's edge, Calith drove his spear through the relay's core. Bioelectric arcs scorched his armor, fusing sigils to skin. The beast collapsed, its neural fire spilling across the ground like a second dawn. For a heartbeat, the swarm froze. He looked to the Exarch he'd dragged. The warrior's eyes were glassed with light, his soul stone pulsing faintly. Calith pressed it to his palm and felt something move within. Not memory, but prophecy. The stone spoke without words, showing him Celestine's halls drowned in silent gold. Lyrael standing, alone before a cradle sealed in darkness. Sereth kneeling beside a broken mirror. "They will find our thoughts delicious," whispered the dying light. "Even despair is flavor." Calith closed his fist until the stone cracked. "Then let them choke," he said. When he returned, half his company was gone, swallowed, mimicked, or reinterpreted into new anatomy. The survivors were pale as ghosts, eyes rimmed with frost. Their minds rang hollow, like bells struck from within. He led them through webway gates that shuddered from proximity to the hive's probing psalms. The last guardian through had her reflection stolen as she crossed. Her body arrived, but her face flickered through expressions that weren't hers. In the council chamber, Lyrael met them. Her composure was porcelain under strain. Calith fell to one knee, setting the cracked soul stone before her. "They drink prophecy now," he said. "Every wound we inflict becomes their scripture." Thasil stood near the choir's base, trembling fingers pressed to his temples. "I heard it," he murmured. "They are writing hymns from our screams. They've learned cadence." Sereth lingered at the door, his face carved with exhaustion and shame. "You said you wanted ours," he whispered to Lyrael. "I bought you one, maybe two. but I think the price just doubled. Lirael lifted the broken stone. Light leaked between her fingers, forming images of the moon battle, Calith's reflection striking twice, the mirrored beast folding into new geometry, the choir echoing through dead air. "They're not just consuming," she said. "They're translating us. They're becoming fluent." Calith's jaw clenched. "Then we silence the language." Thiesel's head snapped up. "Silence means surrender, and surrender is just another flavor." "They will come for the gardens," Lirael said quietly. "The ones tuned to patience. They will not understand why cruelty waits, but they will learn." She looked to Sereth. "Your map lured them once. Can it unteach what they learned?" He hesitated. "Perhaps, if we rewrite the fear to confusion instead of pain. But confusion is still a door. Then we build a labyrinth." The plan formed slowly, drawn across the air like calligraphy of survival. They would weave illusions through the psychic lanes, corridors of mirrored sorrow, designed to trap the Dream Eaters in endless self-reflection. Thaisel would conduct the choir to project empathy, so sharp it bled. Calith would seed false victories that broke into sand at touch. Sereth would overlay terror with tenderness, a poison disguised as solace. When the meeting ended, Lirael remained alone beneath the dim chandelier. She held the shattered soul stone to her ear, listening to the faint hum inside. It was no longer a voice, just vibration, the memory of meaning. In her chambers, she opened her journal, a book older than the craft world itself, its pages woven from wraithbone and sorrow. She wrote, "Each battle teaches them how to love us incorrectly." Outside the viewport, the dead moon turned once more, its wounds glowing faintly where Calith's spear had pierced the hive relay. The light pulsed 3 times, then stilled. Far beyond, in the hive's black lungs, something answered. 3 pulses, slower, deeper, patient. The hive was learning rhythm. On Celestine, the choir shifted tone, unbidden. Its song thinned into a single thread of music that trembled between lament and lullaby. Lirael watched the stars fade, one by one, like candles smothered by breath. She understood then that the war had crossed from the realm of bodies into that of meanings. To survive, they would have to lose a part of what made them beautiful. She whispered into the glass, "If they are dreaming of us, let it be a nightmare worth remembering." The glass fogged in reply, as if something vast had leaned close to listen. 1,000 words. The ghost colony was supposed to stay empty. Its streets of glass bone, its towers like fingers clawing at dead light, everything had been silent for a century. Yet on the night the false beacon was lit, Celestine's horizon flared again with deceit. The terror vectors pulsed, drawing the swarm as intended. The choir trembled under the psychic weight. The colony screamed with no mouths at all. Lirael stood before the great observatory, its panels reflecting the slow drift of fire. Around her, the seer council assembled, pale silhouettes against the burning dark. Thiesel's harp lay untouched at his feet, vibrating with the choir's pain. Calith had stripped his armor of insignia as if humility could redeem slaughter, and Sereth would not meet her eyes. "They're answering," he said at last. "The swarm is moving off course. The lure holds." "No," Thaisel murmured. "The choir weeps. It feels wrong. The echoes come from too near." The holograph above them spun, threads of light showing the hive's drift, a great ocean curling toward their decoys. But within that storm, another current formed, smaller, quicker, like blood seeking a wound. Lirael's hand hovered over the skein. The visions fractured. She saw a starless sea, a single mirrored eye opening within it. "They've learned to read the taste of lies," she whispered. "They're feeding on the performance itself." Sereth's jaw tightened. "That isn't possible." "Yet it happens," Calith said. "Every time we teach them, they grow cleverer. This storm you brought is a feast." Lirael turned on Sereth. "Who lit it?" His silence broke something softer than bone. He didn't have to answer. The skein told her anyway. A masked figure in neutral armor, a hand too steady to belong to innocence, placing the first beacon among hollow domes. The courier's sigil glowed once, then died. "You trusted them." "I thought I could control the burn," Sereth said, voice rough with sheer regret. "I thought if I stood close enough, I'd see the edge before we fell." "Then fall with it," Calith growled, stepping forward, but Lirael raised a hand. "No," she said. "He will live long enough to understand the shape of his error." The choir's resonance cracked. Through the open sky of the observatory, a storm shimmered. The Dream Eaters descending, their wings iridescent with stolen memories. Each carried fragments of music torn from Celestine's own defenses, melodies weaponized. "They're echoing us," Thesel breathed, "singing back what they've stolen." The craft world shuddered as the first psychic wave struck. Ghosts of joy and grief collided in the corridors. Citizens clutched their heads, hearing lullabies warped into screams. Calith drew his spear, its edge dull with exhaustion. "To arms," he said. "We hold them at the mirrors." In the labyrinthine gardens, the defenders formed lines beneath archways that shimmered with refracted light. Lirael took position beside Thesel at the choir's root, weaving psychic chords to counter the hive's music. The air quivered with competing harmonies. Hope versus hunger. The first of the Dream Eaters breached the veil. They were smaller than memory had promised. Thin, pallid things with mirrored faces and limbs that folded like questions. Their wings hummed in sorrowful cadence. When they moved, they did not roar. They sighed, imitating the sound of forgiveness. Calith's strike teams met them in silence. Spears flashed, wraithbones sang. Each kill bought seconds, yet each second taught the swarm more about how Eldar blood sounded when it hardened. The hive drank every note. In the atrium, Thesel strummed a counterpoint, dissonance sharp enough to slice meaning. The choir responded, reshaping despair into rhythm. "They cannot eat uncertainty," he gasped. "Keep the melody broken, never let them predict." Lirael closed her eyes, diving into the skein. Within, the storm was alive, tendrils of thought twisting through the galaxy's skin. And there, at its center, a shape wearing her face, the Mirror Queen. She felt its gaze, cool and curious, as if studying its own reflection. "Why do you resist?" the thought voice asked, silk across glass. "We only collect what you cast away." "You devour what you do not understand," Lirael answered. "You mistake beauty for weakness." "Beauty is just another nutrient," said the Queen. "But this..." The voice caressed her mind, showing her Sereth's memory of her hand on his brow, the warmth before parting. "This is flavor." Lirael severed the link, gasping. Blood dripped from her nose, shimmering silver in the low light. "They're feeding on affection now," she warned. "Every bond, every mercy. It nourishes them." Calith's forces fell back to the third terrace. "Then we give them bitterness," he snarled. "Nothing to taste but iron." Sereth arrived at her, side, face drawn, eyes hollow. "We can redirect the beacon," he said. "Overload it with despair so potent it poisons them." "That will mean lives," Lyrael said. They're already spent. Thiesel's hands trembled on his harp. Despair is still music, he whispered. It will call them closer. Sereth met Lyrael's gaze. We need a chord so false it breaks their hunger. Let me write it. You've written enough lies, Calith snapped. Lyrael silenced them both. Do it, she said. But if this kills you, I will not mourn twice. Sereth smiled faintly. You already have. He vanished into the storm. Minutes stretched. The swarm pressed harder, their hums shifting toward harmony. Lyrael felt the choir straining, edges blurring as the hive learned to sing in unison. Then, from the heart of the ghost colony, a new sound rose. A single, ragged chord, ugly and pure. Despair so condensed it became light. The Dream Eaters faltered. Their mirrored faces cracked, reflections splintering into screaming color. The sound devoured itself, collapsing into silence. For a heartbeat, the galaxy forgot how to echo. Then the explosion came, psychic, not physical. The beacon imploded, pulling in sound, memory, and meaning. The swarm convulsed, their wings folding inward. When the shockwave passed, the skies cleared. The storm was gone. Celestine drifted in near darkness. Only the choir's lowest note remained, steady but small. Calith surveyed the ruined terraces. At what cost? Thaisel bowed his head. The false melody burned him. Lyrael felt it before she was told. The skein no longer carried Sereth's signature. Only an afterimage, a shadow shaped like apology. She knelt beside the harp, fingers tracing its still strings. He gave them despair, she murmured. Now they know its taste, too. Calith placed a hand on her shoulder, but she did not move. The mirror gardens shimmered around them, their surfaces cracked, reflecting broken fragments of sky. Beyond the craft world, the hive stirred again, wounded but wiser. Its song turned quieter, almost reverent. Lyrael lifted her eyes and felt the queen's distant curiosity brushing the edge of thought. The storm had learned silence. That was worse than hunger. They're listening, she whispered. Yes, Thaisel said, and waiting for us to speak again. In the hush that followed, Celestine hung between two breaths, one of survival, one of surrender. The choir hummed like a dying heart. Above, the mirrored stars watched themselves fade, and far across the void, the Mirror Queen smiled. For now she understood that even silence has flavor. The storm had gone, but its echo lingered, woven into Celestine's air, pressed into the hull like bruises beneath translucent skin. The choir no longer sang. It whispered, uncertain whether it still had the right. Every corridor carried the taste of ash and memory. Lyrael moved through the quiet like a ghost who refused to admit she was one. Calith met her at the observation bay. He had not removed his armor since the battle. Its plates were scarred with reflections that were not his own. Behind the visor, his eyes flickered red from the afterglow of too many dead systems. The swarm pulls back, he said, or pretends to. Pretending is learning, Lyrael murmured. Every retreat of theirs is rehearsal. He nodded once, watching the void. And Sereth? She did not answer. The skein had shown her enough. A flare, then absence, death or transformation. Both were forms of distance. In the lower decks, Thaisel rebuilt the choir's nerve paths, coaxing harmony from the wounded conduits. His harp had cracked during the last crescendo. He mended it with threads of wraithbone drawn from his own wrist. It remembers pain now, he told her when she came. Every note tastes of what we lost. That might be good, or it might make the next song too honest. Let it be honest, she said. Deception belongs to them now. He looked up, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights. Do you still believe the skein can be bent toward mercy? I believe mercy may still leave a mark. When she left him, she found Calith waiting with a summons. Refugee ship at the outer veil, he said. Exodite survivors. The swarm had cornered them, but the fleet didn't strike the final blow. It waited, watched, as if studying how they begged. Lirael's pulse faltered. Bring them aboard. The vessel arrived at half-light, engines flickering. Its hull was dented with organic residue, as if something vast had tasted it and withdrawn. The ramp hissed open to reveal a handful of survivors, thin, trembling, wrapped in torn ritual cloth. Among them stood a child whose eyes reflected too much sky. Thaisel knelt before the boy. You made it out? The child tilted his head. They stopped chasing. They were listening to me. Lirael's gaze sharpened. Listening. He nodded, and for a heartbeat the air around him shimmered like heat on ice. The choir stirred, answering a sound she couldn't hear. Calith's spear hummed. That's not a survivor. That's a lure. Lirael stepped forward, raising her hand. No, he is both. The child blinked, confusion washing through him like a tide. They said they were lonely, he whispered. They wanted to know what dreams taste like. I gave them mine so they'd stop hurting us. Thiesel's voice trembled. And did they? For a while. The choir vibrated, low and mournful. Around them, the hull lights dimmed. Lirael felt a tendril brush the edge of her consciousness. Not attack, but invitation. The Mirror Queen was near, peering through the child's memory as through a keyhole. Seal the bay, Calith ordered. Guardians rushed to obey, but the child turned toward Lirael, eyes wide. Don't shut them out. They said they can change. Change into what? She asked. Into you. The words struck like thunder. Calith moved to strike, but Lirael caught his arm. No, wait. She knelt before the boy. Do you still hear them? They whisper when I sleep, he said. They ask me to show them how to wake up. Lirael felt the edges of herself blur, her heartbeat sinking to a distant rhythm. The Mirror Queen was reaching through the child, testing empathy, like a weapon still cooling from the forge. Thaisel, she said softly, can you dampen the choir's link? I can try, but if I mute it entirely, we lose half the craft world's wards. Then hum something else, something imperfect, something human. He nodded, fingers trembling across his harp. The sound that followed was fractured, wrong notes threaded with sorrow. The choir responded hesitantly, the pitch uncertain. The shimmer around the child faltered. A sigh passed through the void. Then silence. The tendril withdrew. The boy slumped forward, breathing shallow. Did I do wrong? He whispered. No, Lirael said, catching him. You reminded them that not all music is beautiful. She turned to Calith. Get him to the healers, quietly. As he left, Thaisel wiped blood from his palms. They're changing the way they hunt. Curiosity first, consumption later. They're becoming artists. Lirael looked toward the black window. Then we teach them tragedy. In the following days, the choir's tone shifted again, echoing the cracked melody Thaisel had played. It became the craft world's pulse, uncertain but alive. Lirael and Calith oversaw the fortification of the Mirror Gardens, weaving new sigils into the wraithbone paths. Refugees filled the corridors, their dreams spilling into the skein like pollen. The swarm lingered just beyond sensor range, silent and vast. At night, Lirael wandered the deserted terraces. She could feel Sereth's absence trailing her like cold perfume. Sometimes she thought she heard his voice in the ventilation shafts, whispering verses of unfinished apologies. Thaisel joined her one evening, harp slung like a wound across his back. "The choir is restless," he said. "It wants to remember him." "Let it," she answered. "But not yet." He studied her. "You speak as if he's still out there." "Perhaps he is. Or perhaps the swarm remembers him for us." That night, the alarms sang again, softly, like a warning whispered under breath. A psychic surge rippled through the void, followed by images pouring into every mind tuned to the skein. A vision of stars blooming backward, of light retreating into its own seed. The Mirror Queen's thoughts brushed Celestine once more. This time, she did not threaten. She mourned. "You taught us sorrow," came the whisper. "Now it colors everything we see." Lyrael stood at the viewport, heart pounding. "If you understand sorrow, then leave." "We cannot. We are what you are becoming." The vision dissolved into silence. Calith approached from the shadows, his armor shedding flakes of dried blood. "Did you hear her?" "Yes," she said. "She sounds tired." He frowned. "Tired things are dangerous." "Then so are we." The choir rose in pitch, trembling as though sensing an unseen dawn. Outside, the swarm repositioned, not retreating, not advancing, but orbiting the craft world in slow reverence, like pilgrims awaiting revelation. Lyrael watched them and felt a terrible clarity bloom inside her. "They are waiting for something," she said. "What?" "For us to decide what kind of gods we wish to be." Calith turned away, unable to answer. Far below, in the healing wards, the boy slept amid faint light. The choir's hum wrapped him in threads of music. Deep in his dreams, the Mirror Queen listened. And for the first time in her long, consuming life, she hesitated. In the stillness that followed, Celestine breathed. Between the stars and the swarm, between beauty and ruin, a fragile quiet held, an echo of something both dying and being born. The Mirror Queen watched the stars through the eyes of her brood. Each shimmered like a thought half remembered, every orbit a confession of light trying to forget itself. Around her, the hive stirred, silent, contemplative, its countless voices folding into one restrained hum. The child she had touched in dreams still slept on Celestine, his mind a doorway she could no longer close. She lingered there, within his dreams, tasting fear softened by hope. It was unfamiliar, and therefore irresistible. In the chamber of command, Lyrael stood surrounded by ghosts of maps. The swarm had ceased its assaults, content to orbit, waiting for something unseen. Calith paced behind her, the scrape of his boots measuring impatience. Thaisel sat cross-legged near the choir's base, his harp across his lap, strings thrumming faintly of their own accord. "They mimic us, again," Calith said. "Their fleets mirror our movements. Every course correction, every pulse of engine flame, copied within minutes. They move like dancers learning our steps." "They are listening still," Lyrael murmured. "Silence may have taught them reverence, but now they seek understanding. They hunger for meaning. Then we feed them nothing." Thaisel's gaze lifted, weary and sharp. Nothing is still something when eternity is hungry. If they starve too long, they will turn hollow, and hollow things devour all sound to fill the ache. The lights dimmed as the choir shifted tone. No longer a whisper, but a drawn breath. Threads of light crawled along the wraithbone walls. The child's dream echoed through the shipwide comms. Laughter and ocean wind, followed by a voice that was not the child's at all. "We learned your sorrow. Show us joy." Calith's fist struck the table. "Enough riddles. We end this." Lyrael's hand rose in quiet command. We cannot end what does not die, but perhaps we can teach it to rest. She turned to Thistle. You said the choir remembers pain. Could it share peace instead? Peace is fragile, he said. It cannot be forced into another, but it can be offered. Then prepare the choir. Tonight, we dream aloud. The ritual began in the Garden of Mirrors, now cracked and glimmering with repair. The surviving populace gathered in solemn formation, soul stones gleaming faintly. Wraithbone resonators thrummed as Thasil tuned them to a frequency born from both memory and regret. Calith stood among the guardians, spear grounded, watching shadows crawl across the floor like premonitions. Lyrael approached the center dais, where the choir's nexus spiraled upward like frozen flame. She closed her eyes and reached into the skein, finding the thin thread that connected her to the child, and through him, to the queen. The link ignited like a candle in an empty cathedral. The choir sang. Not battle hymns, not laments, but something older. A lullaby carried from the first dawn of their kind, when stars were still gentle. The sound flowed outward, across the void, threading through the swarm's vastness. The hive answered. The dream eaters turned their mirrored faces toward the craft world, their wings folding in synchrony. Through 1,000 minds, the Mirror Queen listened. The song reached her not as melody, but as memory. Hands carving temples of light, children laughing under twin suns, a people who had once believed they could escape decay through beauty alone. She felt envy and awe, sensations that clawed at her perfect calm. She projected thought across the gulf. Why do you persist in tragedy? Lyrael heard her as clearly as her own breath. Because tragedy remembers what perfection forgets. The queen's presence rippled, confusion scented with wonder. You choose pain when you could choose silence. Pain proves we were real. A pause long enough to span lifetimes. Then teach me. Lyrael faltered. Calith's voice cut through the chamber. It's a trap. Thistle's harp wavered. Or a prayer. The choir quivered between them, awaiting its conductor. Lyrael exhaled. If this is deception, let it destroy me first. She opened the channel fully. Through her, the choir poured emotion. Grief softened by compassion. Beauty tempered by loss. The swarm absorbed it, neural pathways lighting in patterns never seen before. For the first time, the hive mind did not echo, did not devour. It listened. The Mirror Queen stepped inward through the dream link, appearing in Lyrael's mind as a figure of glass and starlight. You would give me your sorrow? Only if you promise to keep it, Lyrael said. The queen tilted her head. Sorrow cannot be kept. It leaks. Then let it leak into you. Let it make you mortal for a moment. The queen reached out a mirrored hand. When it touched Lyrael's cheek, every reflection in the Garden of Mirrors flared. Alive, Calith, Thistle, every Eldar present reflected 1,000-fold. Behind each reflection moved something vast and trembling. Calith raised his weapon, but Lyrael's voice steadied him. Hold! Through the contact, visions spilled forth. Lyrael's memories unraveling like constellations. Her first vision of Celestine's founding, the promise of eternity, the slow death of wonder. The queen tasted them and shuddered. This emptiness you hide beneath purpose, she said softly. It is exquisite. She turned her face upward, and for an instant, the swarm cried out, not in hunger, but in awe. Across the void, countless creatures froze, their bioluminescent veins flickering in sympathy. Calith watched in disbelief. She's feeling, Thistle whispered. No, she's remembering what we forgot to mourn. The queen released Lyrael and withdrew a step. It burns, she said. How do you endure this? We don't, Lirael replied. We learn to love what kills us slowly. A tremor passed through the swarm. Half the Dream Eaters folded their wings, drifting aimlessly. Others tore themselves apart, unable to bear sensation. The hive mind itself convulsed, birthing 1,000 fragmented thoughts like stars collapsing inward. Calith stepped forward, spear ready. End it now, before she adapts. But Lirael saw something else. A tear forming at the queen's mirrored surface, silver fluid leaking like tears from a face that had never cried. The queen whispered, I see now. Hunger is the shadow of longing, and I long for what I cannot consume. The link flared one final time. In the child's chamber, alarms screamed as psychic energy surged. His body lifted from the bed, eyes glowing with twin lights, one gold, one black. Through him, the queen spoke a last time. If you love your sorrow, I will guard it. Then the lights died. The swarm dispersed, not retreating, but dissolving, creatures falling apart into dust, others drifting into the void without purpose. The psychic weight lifted from Celestine like a storm exhaling. Lirael collapsed, Calith catching her before she struck the floor. Her eyes were wet with blood. She's gone, she whispered, or she's dreaming somewhere else. Thazel struck a single note on his harp, soft as forgiveness. The choir echoed it until even silence sounded kind. Outside, where the swarm had been, the stars burned clearer than before, but among them drifted new constellations, patterns shaped like tears, like mirrors breaking into dawn. Calith gazed upward. What did we just create? Lirael answered faintly. The beginning of empathy, or the end of gods. The silence that followed was unlike any they had known before. It was not peace, but the exhausted quiet of a storm that had forgotten its purpose. Celestine drifted through that stillness, its wraithbone hull dim, its people breathing in disbelief. The choir murmured in low tones, half lullaby, half prayer, its notes uncertain of whom they were for. The swarm was gone, dissolved into the dark, but the void itself seemed to watch. Lirael awoke 3 days after the communion. Her body remembered pain, but her mind carried something heavier, a residue of someone else's thoughts, cooling like ash across her soul. When she rose, light bent strangely around her silhouette. She felt herself both solid and transparent, as if the Mirror Queen still traced her edges from afar. Calith was waiting outside her chamber, his armor dulled with age it had not earned. You slept through a century, he said softly. It was only 3 days, she replied. Then why does everything feel older? She looked out through the translucent wall. The stars pulsed faintly, slow as the rhythm of dying gods. Because something ended, and something else refuses to begin. Thazel entered behind him, carrying his harp like an apology. The choir hums a pattern. I did not teach it, he said. It sings of mirrors and rivers. It sings in 2 voices now, one ours, one theirs. The queen? Calith asked. Or what remains of her? Thazel said. There are fragments in the skein, memories not our own, woven between ours like veins of silver. Lirael touched the nearest wall, feeling it tremble under her palm. She is dreaming through us. Perhaps this is her covenant. Calith folded his arms. A covenant with what? The swarm is dust, their bodies drifting like snow across the stars. Their bodies, Lirael said, not their memory. They learned sorrow. Now they are everywhere sorrow dwells. She walked through the corridors, followed by the faint shimmer of reflected light that trailed her steps. Every polished surface offered a flicker, a mirrored hand, a face that was not hers but almost was. Refugees bowed as she passed, unsure if they should pray or flee. At the central atrium, the choir awaited. Thistle coaxed its low hum into form. Notes spiraled upward like smoke, weaving new symbols into the air. The melody resolved into an image, a great shape adrift among stars, its wings folded, its body asleep. A mirror suspended in the dark. She dreams near us, Thistle whispered, listening, waiting. Calith's grip tightened on his spear. Waiting for what? A reason to wake? Lyrael did not answer. Her gaze drifted across the assembled faces of Celestine's survivors. The hollow-eyed warriors, the trembling children, the bone-zingers who still smelled of wraith dust. They were not celebrating victory. They were learning how to inhabit a wound. That night, she sought solitude in the ruined garden of 3 refusals. The gates no longer obeyed order. They opened only when unlooked at. Beneath the cracked archways, she found the reflection of herself sitting beside a broken pool. The mirrored version spoke first. "You kept your promise," it said. "Which one?" "To teach me pain." Lyrael knelt beside her reflection. "And what have you learned?" "That pain can end, but longing cannot. You've become more like us." "No," the mirror Lyrael said, her voice a chord made of sighs. "You have become more like me. You carry me wherever you go. Every choice you make now, I will feel. We are entwined, sorrow and hunger, teacher and echo." Lyrael touched the water, and the reflection scattered. Only starlight remained, drifting through the broken dome. She whispered to the darkness, "Then let us dream carefully." And elsewhere, in the healing chambers, the child stirred. His sleep had lasted as long as Lyrael's. When he opened his eyes, they no longer reflected the Queen's light, but something quieter, a lingering empathy not meant for mortals. The healers gasped as he sat upright, and spoke in a voice that carried distance within it. "She is not gone," he said. "She walks in the dreams of dying worlds. She listens to their last songs and learns." "What does she want?" a healer asked. He smiled faintly. "To forget." Word reached Lyrael quickly. She visited him at once, kneeling beside his bed. "Do you still hear her?" "Sometimes," the boy said. "She asks me what it means to forgive. I tell her I don't know yet." "Then you are wiser than most." He looked at her with solemn curiosity. "Are you her too?" For a moment, Lyrael almost said yes. "No," she said finally. "But she is what I might have become if I had stopped feeling." The boy nodded as if he understood, then returned to sleep. The next dawn came without colour. Calith stood at the command spire, watching the void. "Sensors show no movement," he said, though his voice held no triumph. "Only dust and quiet." "Quiet is never empty," Lyrael replied. She traced a symbol on the console, a curve that resembled both an eye and a tear. "She watches us through the spaces between thought. We must decide what to show her." Calith regarded her warily. "You sound like her now." "I sound like us," she corrected. "We built empires to escape fear, and they devoured us. She built hunger to escape loneliness, and it consumed her. Perhaps now we learn to live without escape." Thistle entered, the harp slung against his shoulder. "The choir requests direction. Shall it sing of victory or mourning?" Lyrael turned toward the wide expanse of the void. "Neither. Sing of continuation." As Thistle began, the music spread through the ship like dawn through ruins. It was not triumphant. It was gentle, uncertain, yet alive. The notes resonated across the broken gardens and through the sleeping decks. reaching even the drifting remains of the swarm. In the distance, faint lights stirred, tiny motes of bioluminescent dust aligning to the rhythm. Calith saw them first. "They're responding." Lyrael smiled faintly. She listened still. The song grew, filling the void with fragile light. Each pulse marked a heartbeat reclaimed from despair. The mirrored fragments of the dead reflected it until the darkness shimmered with 1,000 small dawns. When the final note faded, silence returned, but this time it was softer. Not a wound, but a rest between breaths. Lyrael placed her hand on the glass of the command spire, where the reflection of her face lingered beside a ghostly second visage. Familiar, tender, inhuman. She did not turn away. "Good night," she whispered. Across the gulf, something vast exhaled, as if accepting the word for the first time. And in that exhale, the galaxy remembered how to dream again. Celestine drifted through a quiet older than sound. Its lights dimmed to a pulse, the slow breathing of a city learning how to sleep again. The survivors moved like ghosts made tender by exhaustion, tending to gardens that no longer grew and repairing hulls that no longer bled. The choir's new song echoed through every corridor, a hum not of triumph, but of endurance. Lyrael walked alone beneath the atrium, where the first stars of a new season flickered through transparent wraithbone. Their light trembled across her face, half shadow, half mercy. The reflection beside her no longer mimicked movement. It watched, patient, curious, as though the Mirror Queen still lingered in glass. "You're still here," she whispered, and the reflection smiled. Calith found her there, armor unpolished, eyes lined by sleepless years compressed into days. "The scouts found remnants," he said. "Organisms drifting, calm, directionless. They do not feed. They glow." "They dream," Lyrael answered. She kept her promise. "And what of us?" His voice cracked like an old blade. "What do we keep?" "Our sorrow," she said. "But we have learned to carry it without turning it into a weapon." He looked beyond her to the stars. "If this is peace, it feels too thin." "Peace always does. It's just the silence between storms. But silence has its own music now." Thasel's voice rose from behind them, soft as wind. He had come to play one final chord upon his repaired harp. The sound shimmered through the atrium, folding light into memory. Around them, the choir responded, its tone steady, luminous. The city began to hum in unison. Not loud, not eager, but alive. The reflection in the glass rippled once, as if exhaling. Across the void, something vast shifted, a presence stretching its wings inside the quiet. No threat, only awareness. The Mirror Queen's echo drifted like a benediction. "Keep dreaming. I will listen." Lyrael closed her eyes. The weight of centuries pressed against her shoulders, but beneath it pulsed a fragile warmth. She turned to Calith and Thasel, her voice barely more than breath. "Let's begin rebuilding. Not to last forever, but long enough to be remembered kindly." Calith nodded. Thasel smiled. Outside, the stars reflected upon Celestine's hull, and the reflection looked back without hunger. Between the broken constellations, a faint shimmer, like a hand resting upon water, flickered once, then vanished. The choir held its final note, stretched thin across eternity, and when it finally faded, the silence that followed felt almost human. The years unfolded like paper, fragile and creased with memory. Celestine no longer wandered as it once had. It drifted deliberately now, tracing the faint spiral paths between fading suns. The craft world's once bright hull bore gardens of glass moss that caught the starlight like dew. The choir had grown quieter with time, its harmonies tempered into whispers that soothed rather than commanded. Lirael sat beneath the atrium, where the stars pooled through a broken skylight and painted her hands in silver. Her reflection still lingered faintly in the glass, gentler now, its expression not quite hers. The Mirror Queen's voice no longer intruded, but sometimes, in the pause between breaths, Lirael sensed her presence, a distant warmth like the echo of a lullaby that had learned to let go. Thaisel played softly in the garden below, his harp missing 2 strings. Each note seemed to tremble with age, a reminder that even beauty must thin. He had aged in spirit, if not in form, the price of carrying melodies too long within the same heart. Calith remained steadfast, his spear mounted above the central gate, never raised again since the day of the Queen's dreaming. Together, they kept the fragile rhythm of survival. The child, now grown, worked among the archivists. His eyes no longer reflected alien light, yet behind them lingered an understanding that could not be taught. He recorded dreams whispered by the choir, visions of dead worlds visited by unseen wings, where sorrow was collected like pollen and carried elsewhere. She gathers endings, he told Lirael once, not to devour, but to preserve, as if she fears what forgetting might cost. Lirael smiled at that. Then she has become one of us. But some nights, the skein still trembled. A shadow moved at the edges of thought, vast and formless. It did not hunger, it watched. The choir would answer with a single hum, and the presence would recede, satisfied, as though ensuring that its reflection still existed somewhere in the dark. Calith visited her one last time, before departing with a small fleet toward uncharted stars. "You built something fragile," he said, "but fragility endures where strength breaks." "Then let fragility be our legacy," she answered. When he left, she returned to the atrium. The stars were fewer now, but they glowed with an intimacy that endless brightness could never grant. She touched the mirror one last time and found no reflection waiting, only her own steady gaze. "Sleep well," she whispered to the silence. The choir's final chord drifted outward, reaching the void where the Mirror Queen dreamed. Across that immeasurable gulf, something vast stirred gently, not to consume, but to hum in harmony. And in that soft resonance, Lirael closed her eyes, knowing that sorrow had finally learned to sing itself to rest. The decades folded into each other like thin pages, and the craft world endured. Celestine glided through the dim arteries of the galaxy, not as a fortress, but as a memory still dreaming of itself. The choir had grown faint, its song now barely more than breath. Yet that breath carried across the stars, keeping alive a single truth, that once sorrow had learned compassion. The archivist, the boy grown into a quiet scholar, walked the ancient corridors with a lamp of pale flame. His steps echoed softly, each one a prayer not to awaken what slept. He paused before a mural of Wraithbone depicting Lirael, her gaze lifted toward a horizon that no longer existed. Beneath the mural, an inscription, "To remember, without needing to own." He often wondered if she still lived somewhere among the reflections. Sometimes, the mirrors whispered faint harmonies when he passed, voices braided with light. On such nights, he would answer them, not with words, but with stillness. It seemed enough. One evening, as Celestine drifted beyond the rim of a dying sun, the choir stirred once more. It began with a tremor, a single note resonating from the lower decks, joined by others like dust awakening to wind. The archivist froze, the lamp flickering in his hands. The song was not theirs. It came from outside. He ran to the observatory. The void beyond the glass was alive with motion. Tiny points of luminescence, millions, maybe more, moved in synchronized patterns, a constellation rewriting itself. The glow shimmered into familiar shapes: wings, eyes, rivers. The Mirror Queen's dream had ripened into presence. Not her, he whispered, heart pounding. Something born of her. The choir answered in tandem, weaving its melody with the starlight's rhythm. Through that fusion came a voice, gentle, vast, and sorrowful. We kept dreaming. The archivist fell to his knees. Lirael, all of us, the voice said. Every sorrow you left behind found a voice. Every hunger you forgave became a song. Tears blurred his vision. What are you now? A mirror that reflects only kindness. The luminous swarm, neither tyranid nor spirit, spiraled around the craft world, forming a halo of living light. For the first time in centuries, the void felt warm. The choir rose in answer, its fractured tones uniting into a single, perfect chord. Far within the ship, deep beneath the gardens, an old mirror cracked quietly and healed in the same breath. In its surface appeared Lirael's face, older, peaceful, watching her people from within the reflection. She smiled once, then dissolved into radiance. The archivist bowed his head. We remember, he whispered, and we forgive. Outside, the galaxy listened, and in the spaces between stars, something eternal finally exhaled. The halo of living light encircled Celestine for 9 days, neither approaching nor fading. It drifted like a tide bound to a forgotten moon, illuminating the craft world's broken spires until they gleamed as if made from breath alone. The people moved softly beneath its glow, speaking in lowered tones, fearful that any noise might break the delicate peace. In the void beyond, the luminous swarm shifted in slow spirals, not as predators, but as pilgrims paying respects to the shape of what they once were. The archivist recorded everything. His fingers trembled as he wrote, for the sight felt like standing at the border between dream and resurrection. Through the observation glass, the lights pulsed in intricate cadence, no longer random, but deliberate, as if writing across the stars. The choir followed the pattern unconsciously, echoing it in faint tones until craft world and cosmos hummed as one. Lirael, the archivist whispered, though he no longer knew whether he meant the woman or the echo she had become. A shimmer passed through the chamber, and the air itself bent slightly, as if bowing. Her presence returned not as voice or figure, but as sensation, the awareness of being seen kindly. Thaisel heard it too, while repairing the harp for the last time. He paused, struck by the sudden stillness that wrapped around him like cloth. She listens, he murmured, through every note that hesitates. Caliph, older than his years, watched from the command spire. He had begun to understand that victory was not conquest, but endurance. Yet even endurance demanded faith, and faith was harder to hold than a spear. He removed his gauntlet and placed his hand on the glass, feeling faint vibrations move beneath it. Somewhere beyond, the light responded. He smiled, his first in decades. That night, the swarm changed shape. Its countless motes drifted inward, forming a slow, spiraling bloom. From the heart of it, a column of radiance rose, stretching toward the void's ceiling. The choir awakened fully, filling Celestine with sound. The melody was not Eldar nor alien. It was both a reconciliation sung without words. The archivist wept as he wrote. The mirror dreams again, he whispered. But this time, she dreams us whole. As the final chord reverberated, the bloom unfolded into dust, The motes scattered, seeding light across the darkness like stars reborn. The void breathed. The choir fell silent, satisfied. Lerael's mural shimmered once and faded, leaving behind only blank wraithbone, smooth as calm water. No portrait, no mark, only reflection. When morning came, Celestine's people found the galaxy slightly brighter. The mirrors no longer held ghosts, they held only themselves. And in that perfect ordinariness, the promise of what had been lingered, gentle as dawn. The last light of Celestine fell softly through the atrium. Gold diffused through the thinning air. The craft world had slowed its drift, letting the currents of space carry it wherever the stars still remembered warmth. Gardens bloomed again in fragile clusters. Flowers shaped like echoes, petals translucent as memory. The people moved through them quietly, aware that they were the final verse of a song long sung. The archivist stood before the empty mural, his lamp extinguished. He no longer wrote. Words had become unnecessary. The choir sang without instruction now, low and content, its voice a single heartbeat stretched across the ship's bones. In its music, he sometimes heard laughter, faint, youthful, belonging to someone who might once have been Lerael. He walked the corridors where her reflection had lingered, but the mirrors only showed him himself, older, gentler, unafraid. In the silence, he understood that remembrance had completed its circle. They were no longer haunted by the past. They were inhabited by it. Every wall, every chord, every scar carried her, carried all of them, like veins of light through the stone. Above, the stars burned fewer yet nearer, as though drawing close to listen. Across that field of dim constellations shimmered a veil, a thin band of luminescence, shifting with the rhythm of unseen breath. The Mirror Queen's legacy, perhaps, or something new born from her quiet dreaming. It neither advanced nor withdrew. It simply existed, like forgiveness, too vast for language. Thesel, his hands finally at rest, left his harp upon the altar of Wraithbone. It pulsed once, acknowledging farewell. "Let the universe learn our gentleness," he murmured. "It has known our fury too long." He smiled at the reflection of his face in the harp's polished curve, and saw peace looking back. Calith never returned from the stars, yet his fleet's signal still echoed faintly across the skein, an endless pulse marking presence without demand. Lirael's name often fluttered through the transmissions, spoken not as command, but as benediction. The archivist listened sometimes and thought he heard her answering, not from beyond, but from within every heartbeat of the craft world itself. At last, the choir dimmed. Its final melody drifted outward through open bays, across the void, carrying fragments of Celestine's voice into the sleeping galaxy. Where the sound touched dust, faint motes ignited, tiny new stars trembling in gratitude. The archivist closed his eyes and whispered the craft world's creed. To remember is to give shape to mercy. The light thinned, folded, and became indistinguishable from the stars. Celestine sailed on, no longer seeking, no longer fleeing, only shining, softly, in the cradle of its own reflection.